efforts, and the funding for capital projects and financing being made available through DBJ, for example, are further evidence of our commitment to the second aspect of our mission, namely getting greater levels of growth. The fact is that we are on a path that has resulted over many years in Jamaica suffering from a serious trust deficit with respect to our international development partners, who believed, certainly at the beginning of this administration, that Jamaica was not serious about rehabilitating the country's economy and taking the actions necessary to restore the economy to sustainable growth. We must also not forget the sacrifices, and this is a point that we emphasized very much in the Parliament, the sacrifices that have been made to get us where we are now in the program of economic reform. Public sector workers have sacrificed possible wage increases. Bondholders, including pensioners, sacrificed earnings on those bonds in order to get a program. And what this means is that we have to ensure that the sacrifices already made do not go in vain because we abandon the obligations that we have entered into under the program. The only way out of our present difficulties is to continue with the program, to pass more IMF tests, get access to more multilateral support, secure more investments to provide jobs in our economy, and achieve the mission of sustained economic growth. Thus far, the sacrifices have not been in vain. Growth has returned. Agriculture, mining, tourism, construction, the ICT and BPO sectors are all growing at credible levels. The DBJ provided another $8.2 billion worth of loans. It exceeded its target for loans to small businesses, which was a $2 billion target. It exceeded that target by 15%. Now, in the budget itself, we have sought to maintain our commitment to the objective of protecting the most vulnerable in the budget and to rehabilitating our infrastructure. The 2014-2015 budget is estimated at $540.1 billion. 42% of this will go towards debt servicing, $324 billion, and the remainder will go towards wages and salaries, capital projects, and recurrent programs. Some $161 billion has been provided to meet wages and salaries of public sector workers. Within the limits of the available resources, strong commitments have been made, that is to say, increases provided beyond inflation to meet our social protection expenditures, improve the physical infrastructure, and improve public security and the justice system. With respect to social expenditure, a total of $22.6 billion has been reserved for a set of social programs. This represents an increase of approximately $2 billion over the amount provided last year, and will allow for increases, among other things, to the PATH beneficiaries, similar to that given last year. That is to say, a 15% increase in benefits under the PATH program. To this must be added the assistance provided to the Student Loan Bureau. And of course, I want to draw your attention to those measures which I announced, which will enhance access to the Student Loan Bureau by changing, doing simple things, changing the age qualification for guarantors, allowing a single guarantor to provide guarantees for up to 3 persons, changing the method of computation of interest, among other things. Not costly, but certainly of potential benefit to the persons who access resources from the Student Loan Bureau. We are also spending a significant amount of resources through the major infrastructural development program and other programs of the Ministry of Transport and Works to rehabilitate our road system and our physical infrastructure. And of course, I would point to the fact that there are other capital projects in public bodies, primarily here Water Commission and the National Housing Trust, which amount to some $53 billion to be spent. Now, this year's central government budgeted expenditure amounts to $540 billion, as I said. Revenues and grants are projected at $421.2 billion. There's a funding gap of $118.9 billion. This is to be financed by loan receipts of $110.9 billion, utilizations of balances in the banking system of $1.4 billion, and inflows from new revenue measures of $6.7 billion. I think it's worth pointing out that this $6.7 billion in fact is low as far as revenue, actual revenue raising measures is concerned, because 1.2%, 1.2 billion of that amounts to a transfer of revenue from the road maintenance fund to the consolidated fund. So that would mean that in fact we are looking at $5.5 billion in new revenue raising measures. We come into question time in a bit. But it's important in a sense because this is one of the smallest revenue packages in years. Don't have the exact computation, but certainly going back the last 3-4 years is one of the smallest revenue packages, and probably beyond. I had indicated in January this year that there was no intention to introduce new taxes in the fiscal year. However, revenue fell short of expectations in the last quarter of the fiscal year. In fact, there's a revenue shortfall of about 5% for the full fiscal year. Revenues overall are about $420 billion. So a 5% shortfall represents a significant amount due to factors beyond our control. The shortfall was due to factors beyond our control, such as the decline in oil prices, which reduced the ad valorem collections in relation to oil, the general reduction in the value of imports, which meant that taxes collected at the border were much lower than expected, and there were also changes in the structure of employment that we are now investigating, which suggests that far more persons are being employed on contracts, which resulted in a fall off on PAYE collections. This highlights the perennial problem that we face in the case of Jamaica, that is to say, too few pay and too many don't pay. Overall, when you look at tax to GDP ratios in Jamaica. We are certainly on the lower end of the tax to GDP ratios in the region. Tax to GDP ratios with the tax package will turn out to be about 24% of GDP. Countries in the region range on average, and indeed countries at the similar level of development, the average is about 28%. The reality is, when we initially looked at the budget in December last year, there was a financing gap of about 10 billion, and this worsened in February with a reduction of tax revenue, of expenditures, and an effort to secure greater revenues. This was whittled down to 6.7 billion through fees from existing licenses being collected, the sale of new licenses in the telecommunications sector, the projected collection of taxes that were previously announced, for example, the minimum business tax, which we have included in what we will collect for the year, including adjustments already announced with relation to betting, gaming and lotteries, but where the legislation was not ready in time to allow for the collections. All of those have been included in the projection, so that instead of $10 billion, which was the gap is $6.7 billion, in effect 5.2, as I said. 5.5. Now, it's not an option to deviate from the 7.5% primary surplus target. That is not an option which Jamaica could choose or should even contemplate. For one thing, it would negate all the sacrifices already made by public sector workers, by bondholders, by the general public that have sustained all the hardships and difficulties that have been involved in the reform effort, and would put us back to square one, where we would be closed out from access to the resources of the multilateral institutions, and we would be closed out further from access to private capital markets. The improvements in our ratings by the rating agencies would disappear, and again the trust deficit, which we have been trying to repair, would be widened even further, because it would be felt that Jamaica had no commitment to itself to undertake the necessary measures to meet obligations, sovereign obligations, which have been solemnly given to meet the 7.5% primary surplus. As I said in the Parliament, and I think I would like to repeat here, the imposition of revenue-raising measures is not something that this administration or this minister takes lightly. For this reason, a number of revenue-raising alternatives were examined, but all the alternatives considered would have placed more burden on ordinary Jamaicans, people less able to pay, and would have had a more far-reaching and negative impact on the economy. We were concerned about, first of all, not imposing any additional burdens on the most vulnerable in the population. We were concerned also to ensure that we didn't do anything to disrupt the general trajectory of the tax reform effort, which is to reduce the rates of critical tax types over time, GCT, personal income tax, and the like. We were concerned also not to disrupt the production process inordinately, or at all, if it could be avoided. Among the alternatives which were presented to me by the persons in the ministry responsible for looking at a range of alternatives. And I'm going through this because I believe it's important to the country to understand some of the difficult choices which face us. It is not possible to reform the economy, especially one that has been mired in low growth and no growth dynamic, without difficult adjustments, without painful adjustments. One option presented was to raise the personal income tax rate. This would have gone against the general principle of lowering rates and would have, quite frankly, put the pressure on that already overburdened PAYE group who carry more than their fair share of the burden, because those who work and who have it deducted by their employer can't avoid it. There are many others who avoid their share, and it is not true to say that the tax administration of Jamaica is not making an effort to secure greater levels of compliance. They built in about $12 billion in compliance efforts last year, and so they are making efforts to secure greater levels of compliance. But our creditors won't take your plans for compliance as an indication that you have a credible budget. You have to have measures in it that guarantee reasonably the revenue outturns that you need to balance the budget. So we rejected the proposition to raise personal income tax. Proposal was also made to raise the rate of GCT. Again, should recall that last year we reduced the GCT rate overall by 0.5%. It's not a lot, but it was an indication of our commitment to gradually lowering the GCT rates, and certainly we felt that not only would this be particularly burdensome, raising the GCT rate would not only be burdensome on the most vulnerable and on the poorest, but would in fact send a confusing signal about our commitment overall to the lowering of rates. Proposals were made that we should consider reverting to the position that we inherited, where there was a tax, a GCT on electricity. We rejected this primarily because the effect of rising oil prices at the present time was placing upward pressure on electricity rates anyway, and would have had a disruptive impact on many of those, particularly small businesses and micro enterprises who operate in residential homes and otherwise, and it would have a general negative impact. One of the more novel proposals which came was for us to consider to impose a special consumption tax on sweetened drinks because of the potential health benefits. We felt that this would be difficult to explain and would have, in the near term, impact particularly on those who are struggling every day to put together a school lunch for the children going to school. And it would be difficult to administer, because it's one thing to say that sweet drinks, as they call it, or aerated water is bad for you. It's another thing to say that how do you distinguish that from sweetened sorrel or sweetened carrot juice, and all of the problems of implementation were considered. It was suggested again that we should expand the list of items subject to GCT. This would have meant an increase in the number of basic items being subject to GCT, and these items again are used substantially by the most vulnerable in the society. The suggestion had been made not only here but internationally about increasing the tax take from petroleum. We felt that that would have had an immediate inflationary impact. And in fact, early on, my comments early on about no tax takes were specifically directed at the petroleum issue. In looking at the alternatives, we asked the questions: are there options that have a wide enough base to allow for a low tax rate and still achieve a desired revenue yield? In this matter, as I said, in the matter of taxes, as you can put it, in the Jamaican colloquial parlance, anywhere you turn, Maca go and juke you. You have to pick the Maca which will do the least damage. You have Pingwing Maca, you have Cuckoo Maca, you have Shame Lady. Some you can't run through without getting seriously damaged. Some you can run through and you can pick it out yourself. But anywhere you turn, Maca go and juke you. What you have to do is to ensure that the effect, particularly on the most vulnerable, is contained, and your commitment to them, to the same segments of the vulnerable population, is to ensure that you remain on a path that can ultimately take them and their children and the generations to come out of poverty. We have been poor for too long as a country, and we can only get out of it not by short-term palliatives, but by laying the foundations for medium-term and long-term growth, which will raise income levels and create the kind of Jamaica which we all imagine, although some of us have given up, I suspect, on the prospect. Now, with respect to the institutional levy on certain financial transactions, what we have done is to levy a tax on deposit-taking institutions and securities dealers, and to compute the liability on the basis of withdrawals from the deposit-taking institutions. And they have been set out: electronic banking, point-of-sale transactions, checks, ABM or over-the-counter, ABM, ATM, ETM or over-the-counter, internet transfers with the exception of transfers between accounts of the same person in the same financial institution. The levy will be charged on encashments from securities dealers, whether partial or in full. Now, as with the levy on rum, on the SCT on rum, producers may decide to pass on in whole or in part the amount levied. What we sought to do, to the extent that is possible, is to have the rates that were used to calculate this levy be the most minimal. So if passed on in total, the impact would be minimal. And further, in order to ensure that the impact would be most restricted on the most vulnerable segments of the population, we also took a decision for a significant increase in the threshold, in the income tax threshold. The rate used in transactions up to $1 million is 1/10 of 1%. 1/10 of 1%. For a withdrawal of $100, could be what, 10 cents. Of $1,000 is $1. No, I was figuring $100. 10 cents. 10 cents. Withdrawal of $1,000, $1. For withdrawal of $400, the levy would be $400, and 400,000 would be $4,000.
No, $400.
$400. For $100,000, it would be $100. For yes, for 400, and for $1 million, it would be $1,000. Now, yes. So, let me go through it again. For a withdrawal of $1,000, the levy would be $1. For a withdrawal of $100,000, it would be $10. For a withdrawal of $400,000, it would be $400. For a withdrawal of $1 million, it would be $1,000. Now, the increase in the income tax threshold of $49,920 provides taxpayers with $12,480 in income tax relief. Based upon this relief, PAYE earners would need to make withdrawals of $12.48 million in a year to be in a worse off position in relation to their tax take, all other things being equal. So if you, let's say someone earning $1 million net, they have got, if they were to withdraw all of that $1 million, $1,000 is what they would pay. $1,000. Their benefit from the movement of the threshold is $12,480. So after they have withdrawn and paid the 1,000, they are ahead of the game. Ahead of the game by $11,480. So the fact is, despite what is obviously a very difficult situation that many persons face, we have tried, the government has tried, the Ministry of Finance, the Cabinet has tried to the fullest extent possible to minimize the impact on the poorest. Indeed, if somebody was earning anywhere up to, let's say, $4 million net, they would be ahead of the game by $8,400 plus in terms of the net benefit for them from this particular measure. And there is no part of these measures that has had any impact on the broad mass of the population. And it keeps the economic program intact. It keeps Jamaica's obligations intact. It keeps the foundations for more growth and investment intact. It keeps the foundations for job creation intact. It keeps Jamaica's reputation intact. And so, nobody likes taxation. But if, and we are always prepared to listen. One thing we have sought to do is to listen. Indeed, there is evidence in this particular package, insofar as reduce the duties on motor vehicles, that we have listened. Because we reduced the duties on motor vehicles, because we could see that it was having a negative impact on revenue flows. It was encouraging efforts to smuggle. And so we're correct, we listen. But those who want to make the contribution need to go beyond just saying don't do. They need to bring some specific suggestions as to whether anything else could be found that would have as minimal an impact, especially on the poorest, as this particular measure has had. I think that I would hope that we recognize that even for businesses, and it depends on the amount of the transactions that they do, but we should not forget that in the course of the last year, we reduced the income tax for unregulated companies from 33 1/3 to 25%, and from 28, that's what it was, to 25%. That we have introduced the employers' tax credit in order to facilitate their employment of labor. That we have removed duties on raw materials and capital goods in order to facilitate investment. And all of these have revenue costs, but which we gave up in order to secure greater levels of growth in the economy and set the platform for growth. So, essentially, what the budget has sought to do, let me close where I started, was to remain committed and to retain the commitment to the economic reform program, to the growth-inducing measures, to protect the vulnerable by expanding expenditures for social protection, for PATH program, for the school feeding program, for example, for the payments to pensioners, and at the same time to continue the restoration of our infrastructure, road rehabilitation and road construction, which is essential both for the convenience of the people and for our capacity to sustain economic growth, and at the same time to improve the delivery of security and justice services to the general public. It is a tight budget, one of the tightest on record. We remain committed to the public sector transformation and the public sector reforms to get growth moving through the system. We have sought to make very palpable and practical our commitment to inclusive growth by increasing the amounts of money going to small businesses for their development through the DBJ, and providing, which is perhaps one of the most significant parts of what the DBJ has committed to doing, to providing the advisory services to make these businesses, especially given that many of our people don't come from a strong business tradition, many of the people operating the small enterprises, and where we want to assist them to become part of the productive sector. We have sought to do all of that in the very difficult circumstances. What we need to do is not to derail the program now in a way that has, I dare say, minimal impact on the vast majority of the Jamaican people. The bulk of these tax-raising measures fall on the financial institutions, including insurance companies and the banks, other enterprises in relation to the asset tax. We have crafted what is perhaps the lowest revenue take in many years and insulated the vast majority of the people from the impact of this. Yet, let me say it again, we remain open to any meaningful suggestions once they take into account the fact that the future of Jamaica depends on us remaining faithful to the economic reform program. We must stay the course. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Phillips. We have a full house this morning, so I'm going to ask those of you who wish to ask questions. I see you, Owen. You'll get one question, and if we have time, we take a second. Owen, no. We're going to take one, then we allow everybody a chance, and then we'll come back to you.
Minister, as you have confirmed, most of the new taxation measures have an impact on the financial sector. Did you get a general buy-in? You must have had some consultations with the sector, the banks and the insurance companies. Did you get a general buy-in to it?
That's the question?
Yes, and was there any pushback?
Well, let me answer the second one first. There was no pushback, no protest. I haven't heard them yet, so I'm assuming that there is general buy-in. I think I would expect most of all, the financial institutions to understand the need for their own continued development to have an economy which is able to continue to grow. That's the long-term future for them and indeed for us. And that's the answer.
Archibald?
Yes, my question had to do with
Can somebody bring a microphone for Archibald, please? Oh, it's there. Okay.
You're using the past tense.
yeah.
It doesn't have to do with it again?
No, it has to do with
Okay.
the issue of stock movement. I understand the general point about the impact on banks and all that, but if your challenge is to encourage private sector companies to get involved in public funds, then the impact of moving a large amount of money. So I wanted to know that. I wanted to respond to that as a concern, especially in the context of what Trump is saying, that you need the private sector to stimulate growth. And then I wanted to ask
Archibald,
no,
one question.
It's the same
Okay.
point. You're driving, you have a concern about the size of your informal economy, but doesn't putting taxes in, doesn't sort of complicating the state of that formal economy keep people out of it, make people less likely to participate. Banks to get a TRN, drive people away from the formal economy.
Well, let me say it's both relevant questions, both. The fact is, though, as I said earlier, that certainly in terms of the impact on businesses, remember you are exempting movements between accounts of the same taxpayer, right? So that movements between won't be captured. But also we have instituted the whole thrust of all the tax reform measures that we did in the omnibus effort December was aimed at reducing the incidence of taxation there. Thirdly, we have taken account of the fact in the structuring of the computation, that is to say, the larger the transaction, the lower the rate. So we are sensitive to the point that you raise. As far as informality, I wouldn't raise informality and non-banked are not the same thing, right? And I think that there are many persons who go into the financial system but who don't necessarily go into the taxation system, and or certainly not, they don't enter the taxation system to the same degree that they enter the banking system. Now, on balance, I don't think this is going to drive anybody to return to a barter economy and to stop using cash or anything like that, or to come outside of the banking system.
Gary Luton from the Gleaner. Hold on.
Morning, colleagues, morning, ministers.
What do you call him?
Minister Phillips, my question is on the issue of compliance. You said in terms of that you would be beefing that up. I note from your fiscal policy paper where you had a 75% success rate and 2 billion in collections. I'm wondering what's the target this year for that area. And if you may indulge me while the minister is consulting information minister, there is a matter of clarification. It's not a second question. You see? It's on the levy on the withdrawals. When Minister Phillips spoke, he spoke about a levy on financial institutions. the ministry paper speaks of a levy on withdrawals. I want to know if it's on my money, the customer's money, that the levy is being placed, or on the bank. If you can do that clarification for us. Thank you much.
Yeah, it is a levy on financial institutions, and there has to be some, let's say the ministry papers language could be more felicitous. It is computed in relation to the withdrawals. Now, do I expect, I can't tell you the response of the institutions. As I used the example with, say, liquor. You raise it, I expect some producers will pass on all in the drink of white rum. Some may pass on some may pass on none at all. Now, what we wanted to ensure, even in the computation, is that in the event that it is passed on in its entirety, what would be the impact on the individual? Right? Now, your first question was on compliance. Huh? No, your first question. If Sandra believe you, that's sufficient.
I never believe anything he says.
But the fact of the matter in relation to the compliance question, we had a number last year which was 12 billion, and you have the rate 75%, and they earned success. Now the issue is that we expect a similar performance. We are going to undertake a similar performance in the course of this year. But I want to emphasize the point earlier. It's like going to the bank, us going to our creditors internationally, and including multilateral institutions. If you are going for a loan to the bank and he says, all right, show me your income of your little business. Huh? You can say, well, my income was $10,000 and I expect, based upon these efforts that I'm putting in, that my income will be $12,000 this year. But, you know, I hope that some more money going come and the people are not going to owe me as much as them owe me last year. Your banker, if he's a prudent banker, won't take your hope in computing whether or not you are bankable. They will want to see, based upon the record of what you have, whether or not you will have the money to repay. So in our case, we can't go with a budget and say it is financeable simply on the expectation that, in fact, you know, we expect compliance rates to be over and above what we had. What we need to do, so don't get me wrong, and I certainly intend to take personal interest in it this year, and I've said so to TAJ, to the FS, and to everyone, is to really modernize our whole tax administration arrangements. We have sought assistance from bilateral and multilateral partners. We have put in place the legislative measures, including the measures to establish TAJ as a semi-autonomous agency. We have put in place amendments to the Revenue Administration Act, which will entitle the TAJ to third-party information. We have put in place legislative amendments to mandate e-filing and things like that. We have put in place legislation to permit them to enter into write-off arrangements so that they can determine when a tax is not collectible. This year we're going to be looking at things to streamline the adjudication process and to ensure swifter settlement of disputes with the tax authorities. So we have a whole lot of things that will have to be done. We have strengthened the large taxpayers' office of the tax administration in Jamaica because, again, we're putting in new rules on transfer pricing arrangements, which I don't want to get too technical, but a lot of the big amounts that you lose don't necessarily come from professional A who closes his books after half his clientele passes through the office, even though we need to go there. But we have to look a lot at the what you might call cross-border transactions that take place between companies and where a lot of tax planning goes into sometimes shades from planning and avoidance into evasion. And that's where we need to place our effort, and quite frankly we need a lot of assistance which we are seeking to get, because a lot of the procedures, especially in today's high-tech world, require particular expertise which we don't have in abundance necessarily.
Hope Town.
My friend Minister, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you, sir.
Minister.
And you?
I'm very well, thank you, Minister.
Good.
Okay. Minister, in your presentation a while ago, which was very comprehensive, you mentioned about 5 times or more the whole question of trust deficit. Am I correct, Minister?
Go ahead. I don't know. I don't know how many times I did mention it.
Okay. All right, Minister. You said that in relation to trust deficit, you said that solemn obligation which was given.
What?
Solemn obligation which was given, your words, to multinational and other institutions overseas. Minister, some time ago, you tore up a contract with the National Transport Cooperative Society. Mr. Millwood died and has not been settled. You know, we died before it was settled.
We're not taking that question. Can we go on to the next person?
No,
this is about the presentation.
I can answer it. I can answer it. There is a settlement has been arrived at. A settlement. No, but that's your one question.
Yes.
No, that's your one question.
Absolutely.
Minister.
Hold on.
About trust deficit, Minister.
No. If you're asking the question, let me answer it. What is the question?
Question is, Minister, why should any multinational institution or even local investors take you and the government very seriously in light of what happened in the National Transport Cooperative issue?
Well, the National Transport Cooperative issue, there was the government of Jamaica many years ago took the decision to create the JUTC, Jamaica Urban Transit Company. It entered into arrangements with the different operators, including to negotiate the remaining period on their licenses. There was not an agreement arrived at in relation to the National Transport Cooperative Society. An arbitration process was entered into and agreed to by both parties. At the end of that arbitration process, as I understand it, there was a dispute arose as to the amounts awarded, and it went to court. It went to the highest court. It went to the highest court, the Privy Council. The Privy Council made instructions and the various phases of that. In fact, at the end of it, and a settlement was arrived at in fact this past year, between the National Transport Cooperative Society and the government of Jamaica for the payments of the amounts in keeping with the settlement arrived at. The first tranche of that payment was made in December. The remaining tranches will be paid in accordance with the terms of the settlement.
Abco.
Good morning to you, sir.
Morning.
The president of the private sector organization of Jamaica, Christopher Zaka, had suggested that perhaps more of a focus on increasing the minimum business tax would be a more palatable way to go, as opposed to what's being referred to as the bank transaction tax. To what extent did you consider that, and why did you go the way you eventually did?
Well, the minimum business tax, remember I said there was the actual gap that we had was $10 billion at the end of December. This package is 5 point something. Included in what the difference between the 5 point something and the 10 is the minimum business tax arrangement. So we are going to be, it's included in our taxation projections for this year. But even after we have done that, even after we have done the other things on the betting, gaming and lottery, even after we have collected on the licenses that were sold and which we will collect some in this year, even after we have done all of that, there is still this gap. Hence, the decision.
All right, we're going to go back and take 3 more questions. We're going to, oh, sorry, Keith. Keith Collister.
Minister, I imagine you've had a tough few days, but can you give us a little bit more detail on the level of consultation that you managed to do with the private sector, including the banks? That's my question.
Well,
Budget.
I met with some representatives of banks on Wednesday afternoon.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Owen, we're going to take 3 more questions. Owen James, Abco, and Archibald.
Minister, there are some new taxes or new revenue measures which could have an impact on personal financial issues such as insurance, life insurance, and so on. From your vantage point, do you get the sense that it will have a major impact? The people who buy insurance are poor people too, you know, sir. Working journalists like myself and Luton and others. Don't you think that will have a major impact on the policies?
The 2 points I'd make there is that the tax there wasn't great. It was moving from 0.14 to 0.25. What's that?
Asset tax.
No.
It's new?
What is the?
It's in the. This one. Is it
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say the increase in the insurance companies and the tax, we don't envisage that. It's not a great tax. We don't envisage that it will have a great, if any, impact at the level of the premiums. And we have particularly stayed away from the health insurance provisions, right? So that, as I said, there is no there is no way of imposing any tax on somebody not feeling the pain. If there is one, I haven't found it.
Abco.
The bankers have expressed to me that they are in some doubt regarding whether they'd have the necessary systems in place in order to pay over the withdrawal tax as of June 1. I want your feedback on that at a later date, but seeing that I only have one question, it is this.
That's sneaky, Abco.
In January, you had said, well, alluded to no plans for new taxation, yes. Last week, Thursday, you announced some 6.7 billion in new taxes. 5.5, yes. You use the word trust deficit. The view has been expressed in the public domain arising from those two utterances. There's a looming trust deficit between Dr. Phillips and the people. You know, some commentators have even said Dr. Phillips lied again. I'd like you to respond to that, sir. Do you find that a credible view?
Well, no, I don't think it is a... Let me say, what I had said, you know, the mercy of headlines, and I'm not going to go and quarrel with newspapers. What I'll probably do is just be a little bit more reticent about conversation. I was asked a question which was directed primarily to the question of petroleum. And I said, no, not doing it. In fact, they subsequently sought to provide a clarification. And I said also, I am not thinking about tax increases, and this was sometime in January, where we had had a 5% thing. I said also, I mean, the 5 billion shortfall was showing up. I said we are thinking primarily about tax reform for the year, but we will have to make the 7.5% surplus target. The problem of having a range of thoughts summarized in one line in a headline, and that becoming the record of your range of thoughts, puts me at a particular disadvantage. No, as I said, I am not complaining. I'm just a little wiser about these discussions. I don't think it was the journalist who did the interview that picked the headline. I think it was just one of those things. So there it is. I value the trust of the population. I value my own reputation. I have tried at length here this morning to go through all the elements of the decision-making process, all the issues that arose, all the calculations that have to be made. I mean, in the scheme of things, what is more important, what is most important, is that Jamaica stays the course on this way. It is Jamaica and its future that I am more invested in, and the government is invested in. In the course of that building of Jamaica, some of us will come, some of us will go. We're not going to be here forever. Some people will like us, some will believe us, some won't believe us, and all of these things, part of life. As you get older, I've learned to take these things in some sort of stride and put them in some sort of perspective. What I would not like to happen, though, is that vision of a Jamaica, which got articulated in 1938, got reinforced in 1962 when we achieved independence, which was of a Jamaica where we would have a vibrant economy, where we would be putting people to work, where those who bought into the Jamaican dream, our children, would feel that if you went to school and studied hard and achieved, you'd be able to come out and get a job in a continuously expanding economy and live in a safe and functional society. That dream is what needs to remain alive. Too many people have sacrificed for it. Too many people have felt betrayed by it. So Peter Phillips, in the scheme of that, is just one person that has been trying to hold my role as we go along. Don't make it about me, but rather make it about Jamaica turning that corner by staying with this economic reform program. Because the hour is late. The world economy is going to be moving into a phase of growth, I believe. And what we have to decide is that when it expands, are we going to be there with it, growing with it, expanding with it, or are we going to miss that train once again?
Archibald.
A little hypocritical, though, in Parliament's having a discussion about bank fees, and at the same time you're imposing a fee which may lead to additional bank fees or increasing some of them.
No, this is not a bank fee.
Transaction fee, deposit taking.
Yeah, no,
Lead to an
I mean,
increase in
no,
bank fees.
this is not a bank fee. Right? No, and I am not entering the debate about bank fees. I would say, however, that some banks charge fees on some things. Some banks don't charge those fees. Consumers need to make some choices about where they bank and where they don't bank. That's part of the power of the market. Consumers have to take those decisions. What our decision is about is how is it do we provide the necessary services that government must provide and which must be paid for in some sort of way in order to keep the country going.
But that was just a rejoinder to Abka.
No.
Thank you, Archibald. Thank you. We want to thank everyone for coming. We want to thank Dr. Phillips and his team, and we want to thank our viewers, especially on the PBCJ and those on the World Wide Web who joined us. Thank you very much. Have a great day.